High School. My name is Julia Beals. I'm the new head of UHS, and you've probably gotten these seats a few more times than I have. It is a delight to have you all here and to have a wonderful opportunity to partner with WORKS to bring Madeline and Levine to our campus. A couple of things. We thought it would be good if we stayed down below because we did not want Madeline flying off the this is a set for the Crucible, which is, I love the fact that we're going to have John Proctor out here in the middle of the audience. So we thought we would keep it informal and stay down and stay safe. I also want to, I'm doing this okay. To say that it's lovely to have a opportunity to have this partnership with VERS because, as you know, UHS is in the original building, which was the high school of Catherine Delmark School many years ago. So we have another wonderful connection. And speaking of partnership, I just want to add that we are so grateful that you are interested in coming to hear Madeline this morning because we value so much the partnership that we share in raising your children together. And I know it's going to be a wonderful morning, and I will hand the microphone off to Michelle, who is going to introduce Madeline. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julia, and I echo everything she said. It's a really wonderful opportunity. It's great to see so many people who came out this morning. I know our lives are all busy, which is what Madeline will speak to a bit, I'm sure. But that we really have to take the time to stop, reflect, and think about our parenting and our partnership together. But this is a really wonderful opportunity for us to work with UHS and to continue to work our partnership. So thank you again, Julia. I'm going to take a few moments. I've had the privilege of hearing Madeline speak on a number of occasions, and so you're really in for something special this morning. But she is really quite accomplished, so if you will indulge me, I'm going to take a few minutes to read and share with you an extraordinary background with a sense of where she will be coming from and what she will be sharing with you. So, Dr. Madeline Levine is a psychologist with close to 30 years of experience as a clinician, consultant, educator, and author. Her New York Times bestseller, Price of Privilege, explores the reasons why teenagers from affluent families are experiencing epidemic rates of emotional problems. Her latest book, Teach Your Children Well, also a New York Times bestseller, tackles our current narrow definition of success, how it unnecessarily stresses academically talented children and marginalizes many more whose talents and interests are less easily measured. The development of skills needed to be successful in the 21st century, creativity, collaboration, innovation, are not ones that are easily measured. Teach Your Children Well gives practical, research-based solutions to parents to help their families return to healthier and saner versions of themselves. Being a mother of 2 young children, I can appreciate that. By remembering that successful parenting is measured 20 or 30 years down the line, not the most recent grade report period. Both of her books have been translated into Chinese, Russian, Japanese, and multiple other languages. What she is saying, people are listening to. Dr. Levine is also a co-founder of Challenge Success, a project of the Stanford Graduate School of Education. Challenge Success believes that our increasingly competitive world has led to significant anxiety about our children's futures and has resulted in a high-pressure, myopic focus on grades, test scores, and performance. This kind of pressure and narrow focus isn't helping our kids become the resilient, capable, meaningful contributors that we need in the 21st century. Challenge Success provides families and schools, first quite involved, with the practical research-based skills they need to raise healthy, motivated kids, capable of reaching their full potential. Dr. Levine graduated Phi Beta Kappa from the University of New York at Buffalo. She's a New Yorker. With a BA in English and an MA in education. She began her career as an elementary and junior high school teacher in the South Bronx of New York before moving to California and earning her MA and PhD in psychology. She has had a large clinical practice with an emphasis on child and adolescent problems and parenting issues. and she has taught child development classes to graduate students at the University of California, San Francisco Medical Center, and for many years, Dr. Levine has been consultant to various schools from preschool through high school, public as well as private throughout the country. Currently, she spends most of her time crisscrossing the country, speaking to parents, educators, students, and business leaders on topics related to children. Dr. Levine is a highly sought-after lecturer and keynote speaker for parents and business leaders. She is frequently the go-to person on these issues for both print media and radio, having been featured on television programs such as Katie, The Today Show, The Blair Report, and on multiple radio stations, including NPR programs such as The Diane Rehm Show, Forum, Tell Me More. And this is an amazing statistic. She wrote an op-ed piece in August of 2012 that was emailed over 1 million times. It is the most emailed op-ed piece in the history of the Times. It's extraordinary. But I think what she is most happy and proud to share is that she and her husband, Dr. Lee Schwartz, are the incredibly proud and slightly relieved parents of 3 newly minted adult children. So welcome, Dr. Levine, and I'll give you the audience. Thank you so much.
Hello. I have to tell you, today's my 65th birthday. So I'm doing a lot of thinking about my life, and it was kind of nice to hear all of that. I feel pretty good about what I've done. And I guess in a way, before I started, it's sort of like that's the long view. I think one of the things that I have is what the long view looks like. My children are older. My kids are 21 to 32. I'm 65 today. So I have a view of what parenting looks like and aging looks like that's very different than what it felt like when I was trying to make the decision about whether to pull my youngest kid, my oldest kid actually, out of Brandeis, because we had moved to a good public school district, and I went to the shrink, and I had psychological testing done, and I thought it was going to make or break his life. It didn't. And many of the decisions that seem unbelievably critical in the moment won't look that way when you're standing someplace at your 65th birthday and having a drink with your friends, which I hope to do later. Okay. So I'm going to talk about success and our current version of success and what I think is problematic about it. But I want to be careful about one thing, and that's that you'll see it in my own slideshow. We tend to look at outliers. We tend to look at people who have done extraordinary things. I have kids in my office saying I'm dropping out of school. Bill Gates did. I have to say you're not Bill Gates. We were talking, unfortunately, there was a suicide at Redwood High School last week, and if you want to get somebody's attention, you just throw up the suicide or the depression slides, and people pay attention. But I'd like you to hear today's talk in a slightly different way, and that's not so much because I know some of you in the audience, and you've heard me talk about the very, very high rates of emotional problems that are being documented now in kids like yours. And I think that's something to pay attention to. It's about 1 out of 4 kids. So if you look, kind of to your left and your right, one of you is going to have, well, that's great. Shows my math ability. One of you is going to have a problem. But I think the bigger issue for me is how just generally, trying to think of the right word, deprived, evacuated, empty, which is what the price of privilege starts with, so many of the kids I see are. So I've been, and here's an example, I've been traveling around. I had stopped my practice for almost 3 years. I opened it 2 weeks ago for 1 day. for one day, and I'm full, with kids who are already stressed out, unhappy, throwing up, not sleeping, having headaches. You know, half of them are not at all diagnosable, they're clinically diagnosable, they're just incredibly stressed. And so the issue of having a happy childhood, of having the time to enjoy your childhood, to be able to think about your future, to relax, to do all the things that most of you probably had some time to do when you were kids, is just as big an issue. It's a much harder sell. It's easy to sell you, watch out, your kid's going to end up suicidal or depressed or something like that. To say your kid's just going to end up unhappy or sad isn't as good a sell, but it's much more common, and it really is just as important. It affects far more kids, okay? So having given that frame, what I want to talk about today is what those problems look like for kids at different ages, what it looks like for schools and what it looks like for parents. But before I start, I want to do something that I do every place that I go now, and that's to ask the people that I'm speaking to, how many of you have actually followed a really straight path to success, meaning that you went to a great, private school, and then you went to a selective or an Ivy or something like that, and then you got a good job, then you went back and got an MBA, and then you worked for McKinsey or something. That sort of trajectory, a really straight, successful, selective kind of trajectory. How many of you have followed that trajectory? Just raise your hands. It's always a group. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Okay, so 14 of you have followed that kind of trajectory. That's that straight trajectory. And I would say, I don't know, what's your auditorium called? Do you have any idea how many people are here today? How many? 308. Okay, so we have 200 people or so. Anybody who's good in math, can you tell me 14 is what percentage of 200? 7 or 8? Thank you. Note again, math skills. Okay? Every place I've been, it's always like I'm holding my breath, but every place I've been, and this is now my 33rd school of doing this, the number of people on that trajectory is somewhere between 1 and 10%. And I'm comfortable enough with it now that I haven't just added the numbers to my PowerPoint, because God knows I wouldn't know how to do it. Okay, so there is a straight trajectory that a small number of people get on, and they're happy, and we're not even talking about whether you like the trajectory or not, or you're happy at the end of the trajectory. It's just that it's a doable trajectory, always for about 10% or less of the audiences. And I'm always speaking to audiences like this, or almost always, people who are considered successful. So if 1 to 10%, in this case 7% of you, what?
More than 7, I thought it was 300 people.
Oh no, so what is it? What's the right number?
This number.
It's what? It's like math class with a teacher who's an idiot. Okay, it's going to be in there somewhere. All right, so for most of us, including myself, success looks more like this. So yes, I wrote these 2 books that were bestsellers, and I was in Canada last week, and I had this funny experience. I got introduced to Dr. Madeline Levine, who's had 4 New York Times bestsellers, and I've actually written 4 books, but the first 2, I think my mother and my husband read, and nobody else did. But what seemed to me was that once you're successful, you get this sort of aura around you, right? It looks like you've always been successful. So somehow I went from 2 to 4 books just around that. And I think, actually, this is a very important thing to let your children know, that If you haven't always been successful, if you've had problems, if you've fallen back, if you've fallen down, let them know that. Because from a kid's point of view, even a teenager's point of view, looking at you, you look astoundingly smart and capable. And why would they want to screw up when they see you at the height of your career or doing things you love to do, and they never get to see the failures that you had? So one of the things we did around the dinner table was talk in very, I don't mean in dramatic ways, in very simple ways about the challenges you might have over the course of a day. It could be, I used to talk about like if my jacket wasn't ready, from the cleaners, and how I was going to choose something else to wear or whatever. Just the idea that adults struggle with disappointments and challenges and stuff like that too is incredibly relieving for children, because it's easy to imagine how a small child sees us as big and capable, but so do our teenagers, although you would never know that. So this leaves 90 to 99% of people who have a much more back and forth kind of trajectory. And I just read a really interesting statistic this morning. They were looking at startups that failed and startups that were successful, and what happened to those people in their next startup. So what do you think? You have a group of people whose last startup was successful and a group whose last startup failed. Who do you think did better on their next startup? Okay, so that's a setup question. No, it's not the people who failed. The people who succeeded did minimally and not statistically significantly better. So the fact that people had failed didn't really put them at any disadvantage from the people who had done well. And there's a million things that go into startups that I don't know about, but I thought it was interesting, and I knew you'd give me that answer. Okay, but this is the reality. And the reality is letting kids know that none of us are 100% successful at anything. People who've heard me speak know my history of not being able to find my way around the block. And so when we do our Challenge Success meetings, and I stay at a hotel across from Stanford, across the street from Stanford, I have somebody come get me. Because I will end up, at San Jose State instead of at Stanford, because I have terrible visual spatial stuff. So guess what? I didn't become a surgeon. I didn't become an airline pilot. I played to my strength. And I think that's what most of us do. None of us are A students in everything we do in life. And the idea that our kids need to be straight A students, I think is a profound misunderstanding of the fact that kids have strengths and weaknesses. And I know when I get the phone call, and I do get this phone call with regularity, of a mom saying, my daughter is at such and such school, and she's got 4 A's and a C. I know that I'm not being called about the 4 A's. I'm being called about the C. But I'm like a D student in a whole bunch of things, and I'd like you, when this is over, to think about your own strengths and weaknesses, where you excel and where you don't, and realize that so much of where you don't excel, you opted not to do in your life, right? So I think that's like adults' best kept secret from children, is that not even the most successful of us are good at everything we do. And we need help, and we tend to play to our strengths. And my own point of view is we actually spend too much time trying to work on our kids' weaknesses, when really what we should be doing is cultivating their strengths. So parents get very flipped out about, if he gets a B or a C, then he's not going to get into Stanford. And guess what? That may be right. But the number of kids who belong at the Ivies or the selective schools is very small. I keep going to school. I was just on Long Island going to schools where 60 or 70% of the class is applying to the Ivy Leagues. It's never going to happen. You know, there is no class in America where 70% of the kids are going to get into the Ivy Leagues, belong in the Ivy Leagues. There's a million great schools out there, and my co-founder Denise Pope and I will often speak together, and she will always joke about the fact that she went to Harvard and Stanford, and I went to the State University of New York at Buffalo, but I get more money when I speak. So, so it's just a sort of a good-natured joke. It is not, does it make a difference? Statistically, we have no evidence that it makes a difference. As a matter of fact, a few studies that have been done that look at kids who go to selective schools. For example, Yale did a big study, and they found that the first year out of school, the Yale graduates that were using work satisfaction and salary as a measure of success. First year out of school, there was a difference. 10 years later, 15 and 20, there was absolutely not a difference. So that's the kid. You know, it really depends on the kid. And for the right kid, selective schools are great. And I'm going to tell you later about an example in my own life where a very non-selective school made a huge difference. Okay, so, you know, here's what I said you shouldn't do. You know, you pick the outlier, the guy who was fired from his own company, the guy who was cut from the basketball team. But for sure there are outliers, but I think anybody who is successful has had to have had experiences that build resilience. And how do you build resilience? And let's talk about it on a slightly larger scale than just being fired from your company or, you know, being the world's best basketball player ever. I mean, kids need resilience. The kids that I see in my office are all suffering from a lack of resilience. And that means that when they hit a wall, which is inevitable in childhood and adolescence and pre-adolescence, they don't have coping skills. They just don't know what to do about it. And why do they not know what to do about it? It's because we have intervened so quickly, so anxiously, so readily when our kids run into trouble because we are scared. And why are we so scared? So I was introduced to somebody who just sent 3 kids out into the work world. It's a tough world out there. And people are afraid that their kid's gonna, I don't know, you know, end up graduating and sitting home on the sofa, playing video games and smoking a bomb for the rest of their life, right? We don't want that for our children. So we're looking for anything that we think is going to give them a leg up, right? And that makes sense as a parent, but I think our idea of what gives kids a leg up deprives them of the exact thing they need when they get out in the world, and that's the ability to be flexible, to tolerate risk, to be able to recover from disappointment, because that's just part of life. I mean, there's like 200 people here, right? So how many of you have never had a financial reverse, a serious illness, a death, a loss in your lives? How many of you have not had any of those things? Okay, usually there's one person who raises their hand and I'm like terrified that that one person is going to walk out of the talk and go into the parking lot and, you know, like just get wiped out. But there's nobody here, so I don't have to worry about that. I think the point is that's life, and it's very hard for us to think that in 25 years from now, your children will be sitting right where you're sitting, and somebody will ask them that same question. Have you ever had to deal with something tragic, some great loss, a big reverse in your life? And their ability to have dealt with those things depends in large part on the kinds of resilience and coping skills that they've developed. And they're really not good. I mean, I see kids from all the schools in the city, all the schools in Marin, and they're always looking, you know, it used to be when I saw a child in therapy, they was sort of aggravated to be with me. They didn't want to be seeing the shrink. They didn't want to be told what to do. They were talking about great world issues, you know, that was 20 years ago what kids talked about. Now they come in and they want to know what they're supposed to do. The sort of curiosity that adolescents have typically had has been really attenuated because they're so accustomed to somebody from the outside world coming in and solving their problems. And Julie Lithcott-Haynes is fond of this story of being she was the dean of freshmen at Stanford, and there's this young girl walking early in the semester across campus, and she gets where her next class is, and so instead of reaching into her backpack, which has her schedule, she reaches into her pocket and calls her mother 16 time zones away in Asia to find out where her next class is. And while it sounds like an outlier story, it really isn't so much an outlier story. I have plenty of women that I treat who come in showing me pictures of a skirt or a dress or a pair of shoes, and they're proud because their kid at college isn't sure which pair of shoes to buy. And it's like, see, we're so close. She can't buy a pair of shoes without me. And it's like, see, that's like really bad. Because at 21, she should be able to buy a pair of shoes. So we sort of mixed up a little bit, and it shows in our kids the idea of what a close relationship with the child is and what an overparenting relationship is. So, which brings me to overparenting. And that op-ed that had 1.5 million now emails, which was really kind of interesting, and I think this actually speaks to the heart of the whole parenting issue. I'd like to tell you that was a brilliant kind of piece that I wrote, and it was just genius. And of course, it's the most emailed piece in the Times history. You know, nah. It was a good piece, but it was just what's overparenting. And when they called to tell me it was the most emailed piece, I said, no, that it had to be something like the fiscal cliff or the killing of Bin Laden, and it wasn't. And I think at the end of the day, after we worry about everything else in our lives, we come back to worrying about our children most. And I think because it was a simple explanation of how to raise, it was just called Raising Successful Children. That's what people are worried about. That's what people want information on. And I don't think I have to make the case anymore that kids are stressed. You know, when I started this 6 years ago with The Price of Privilege, I was constantly being challenged, like, no, that's not the case here, we don't see it, you must be imagining this, or it's on, of course you're from San Francisco, everybody's crazy there anyway, but that's not the case anymore. I can't remember, it's probably been 2 or 3 years since I was challenged on whether or not life is stressful for kids. Now people want to know what to do about it.